Thanks. Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here to represent the University of Waterloo, and specifically our new digital media program at Stratford. In fact, we're about to launch a new Masters of Digital Innovation, and if you want to hear about it, please talk to me later. That was a shameless plug. We've assembled today a global technology group, leaders in their field, and they're going to talk about the big conversation and where the tech industry is going. Our panelists today are Geoffrey Moore, our keynote speaker this morning, somebody who I really do think is a giant in the area. I've always used his material both in my courses at Wilfrid Laurier and the University of Waterloo. Phil Deck, the executive chair at MKS, John Ruffalo, the Senior Vice President and Head of Knowledge Investing at OSI, and somebody who I really enjoy working with, Eugene. He always makes me feel like I'm not smart enough whenever I talk to him. And he's the Chief Technology Officer at OpenText. And I'm very delighted to actually introduce Kevin Newman, our moderator. I believe everybody knows Kevin, but you will see that he's a journalist of 30 years, very well-known, legendary news anchor, and a great Canadian. What you probably also don't know is that he's also an innovator and an entrepreneur. And he's working on some really neat stuff. He's an advisor to the Stratford campus. And I hope sometime in the near future, you'll be hearing about some of the killer apps he's working on. Kevin, I'll turn over to you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Geez, if you're not smart enough for this room, then I'm certainly not smart enough for this room. But the good news is I've made a pretty good 30-year career of asking obvious questions of very smart people. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that once again. As Paul mentioned, I've sort of done the deep dive and watched as my industry, the media industry, was the next one to face the onslaught of fundamental change and the digital revolution, and decided it was interesting enough and scary enough that I just jumped right in. So it's been a bit of a sink and swim, and I've been very honored to have the help of Communitech and the University of Waterloo Stratford campus to be my Hello. Oh, there you go. Anyway, they've been my lifeguards, and I thank them very much for that, because I really would have drowned without their help the last little bit. Okay, so here we are. A couple of housekeeping notes. First of all, before we get started, if you haven't noticed already, the hashtag for this conference is TLC11, and feel free to bounce stuff around. I'm obviously doing something wrong. Feel free to bounce stuff around and keep the conversation going, because there's lots of people who aren't in this room who are sharing in it as well. And rather than do lots of talking and then have questions and answers later, we thought we'd try and mix it up a little bit and have dialogue throughout this conversation, the big conversation. So what I'll do is I'll break it down into little areas, and as you're listening, as you're thinking, and you have something to offer, I'll throw it out to Ian, who's playing in... What's that? Ian is playing the role of Oprah Winfrey, and Ian will be... there you go. Okay, and Angela is the other person. Angela, are you out there? And just... where are you? Oh, there you are. Okay, over there. So they'll be wandering around. If you have something to say, grab them, and we'll make it a larger conversation than the four distinguished gentlemen that are here right now. So I thought I'd start off where our keynote brought us to after his morning session, talking about enterprise IT and his thesis anyway, that perhaps that's the big play for not only the Waterloo region, but for any entrepreneurs and any startups in Canada right now. He had his say, so we're going to bop it around to a couple of the others and see what they think about that thesis, and probably build on it as well. So let's begin with Eugene, if you don't mind.
Good afternoon, good morning, actually. This must be, can you hear me there? Are we on? Yeah, okay. So it's Wednesday. I must be in Waterloo. I've been in 3 cities in the last 5 days. Welcome to the world of digital disruption, because the demands of people like myself and others to go out and listen to customers. I've been listening to customers aggressively for the last 6 weeks, but in fact for the last 3 months. They're telling me a couple of things. Number one, You know, this whole thing about VMware and virtualization and the changes, it's gone mainstream, hard. Now, there's a trend here setting itself up. It's called cloud computing. I call it the fog, because everybody's talking about it. It's like when we were teenagers, we all wanted to have keys to the car, and some of us did, some of us didn't. But cloud computing is coming. The question is what's driving it? And it's things like this. You know, this is my new notebook. You may not recognize it as such because it's called a tab of some sort of playbook, perhaps, if it does get released soon. You know, I saw the HP device yesterday, played with it. You know, everybody's got this. Yet a year ago, this was an emergent thing. The question is, what's a smart surface like this going to disrupt? That's the question. You know, the stat this morning from Apple was 40 million devices will be sold. It's the fastest selling device in the history of technology. And the unexpected effect is very simple. This was sold as a consumer device. The number one purchasers are middle-aged to aging IT and professionals because they can't see. So, you know, welcome to the theory of, and I'm one of them. Well, that comes, by the way, from staring at a screen for more than X years, right? So the theory of unexpected consequences is alive and well in the year 2011. I think one of the things that I'm very interested in, I think the Waterloo region personifies, is a forward-looking view, active debate of what's the forward view, and then dealing with it concretely through market opportunities. That's the opportunity for Canada, it's the opportunity for Waterloo, it's the opportunity for other parts of the world. If we look at the future of smart surfaces, there is no limit of what's possible. You see them everywhere here. Actually, I am lit here with my smart surface on a stage. Now, when I was 21 years old at U of T, I dreamed, not U of W, sorry about that, but I dreamed of having a smart device like this. The question is, what are the 21-year-olds dreaming of next? And I got some bad news for you. The ones I talk to are blinded by all this technology, and they're caught in the fog. A lot of young people today are so bathed in all this stuff, they're having trouble seeing forward. So it's up to folks like ourselves to help and also to harness. But there are young people in this room, and I know some of them, who are forward-looking. There's a young individual in this room that's working 3 jobs. I won't name him out of respect, but he's working 3 jobs because he so believes in what he's doing. That's that energy, that's that inventiveness. I'm sure his parents think he's crazy, but that's what they said about Wozniak and Jobs once upon a time.
That's a good point about how when you have a new device like that, you know, you never know. It turns out you can make the letters bigger, so that's useful. A lot of people are using it to read and watch television in bed. You know, that's and I'm not sure that was imagined as well. Phil, let's go over to you and trends for the future. What do you think about the idea that enterprise IT is important?
Well, I guess the biggest underlying trend to everything that's been going on for the last 10 years and the next 10 is just increasing connectivity. I mean, tablets work because of connectivity, but I guess, you know, I think we need to point out how little has changed. That it's still the web, and you know, the web is becoming enabled in all these kind of things because of the connectivity. And I guess I'm a bit skeptical of trying to focus on massive change. I'm a skeptic a bit on the app trend because it's just applications. I'm not sure the way they're being sold is all that important. I think that eventually, and I think Jim Balsillie has pointed this out in a good way, at the end of the day, through all these connected devices, we still just want the web. We don't necessarily want dumbed down apps. Apps today remind me of WAP in the late 90s, where people said, well, we have these tiny devices, there's no bandwidth, there's no screen, so let's have a dumbed down web for small devices. And people just said, I don't want a dumbed down web. Figure out a way to make it smart again. I want the whole web. And I think it's the case with these devices. So it's connectivity that's really driving the change. And I guess the second one would be that major enterprises, and MKS is a company that sells basically workbenches for large enterprises to develop software. The ones that are really having to rethink their strategy are the big IT companies that effectively have internal software development organizations. They're having a hard time maintaining the right people. They're having a hard time maintaining an advantage, and I think there's a huge opportunity, maybe for companies in this room, to start, retiring those homegrown applications that have grown up in so many huge IT departments with apps that can deliver a lot more value.
John?
So thank you. Unlike the other esteemed colleagues here, I'm starting a new opportunity and really want to absorb a lot of the thoughts that I've seen today. And Geoffrey, from your conclusion, it was interesting that based on the activities in the Valley, that would probably be the furthest area that people seem to be focusing on, as opposed to buying shares at whopping valuations on the secondary market in the hope of being a character in the next Oscar-winning film. But aside from kind of the focusing on the consumer side, we're very focused right now in that, for those of you who may not know what OSI is, it's actually an acronym. It's my current role right now is that I'm with OMERS. For those of you who don't know, OMERS is a pension fund, and OMERS has launched Canada's largest venture capital fund. We will officially launch it around June, and I'm spending a lot of my time really trying to answer some of the questions that Geoffrey had mentioned. It was interesting is that I couldn't agree more that the enterprise IT area is where I think the next 10 years are. I think it has been ignored. Just simply from a making dollars perspective and from a valuation perspective, it is completely two different worlds right now. The interesting thing that we are seeing from an enterprise IT, though, and I think you described it in the neutralized category, and this is a tendency for Canadians in particular, the whole adage about when is good enough. We are actually starting to see a lot of the enterprise IT applications being developed, but are using the principles on the consumer side in terms of the interface, ease of use, doing things that you would normally do without instructions like the way that you had described that, but using some of the new models of viral marketing to actually get more users, as opposed to perhaps traditional models of selling into the enterprise. So we're kind of seeing some of the best things that are more associated on the consumer technology side being applied to the enterprise IT side. I think right now our view would be is that we would rather spend more of our time on the enterprise side, just largely because it's been ignored for so many years.
Well, let's dig in a little bit on this idea of apps then, because I think there is some disagreement about whether a better enabled web is the way to be building companies of the future, or whether maybe the app culture helps for what Eugene was talking about, and that if you're overwhelmed by the amount of information that's available everywhere, do you need specific channels that you go back to because that's kind of what your pattern is and now you've organized your life. So let's drill down a little bit about the future of apps in particular. And Geoffrey, do you want to start on that and how you see that? Because adoption is a problem here. You can get so much information that institutions, companies, corporations can't do it.
Yeah. So what's been attractive about apps in the first wave, I think, is that they were snacks. They were 99-cent, $2.99 snacks, which was a very interesting, this whole information snacking thing, and it's very tied to the mobile stuff. We did some work with Mozilla. Now, Mozilla does the Firefox browser. So browser apps different. Well, their next generation of Firefox is going to run apps, because apps to them is another form factor, which I think is closer to the spirit to maybe one of the points Phil was making. It's just another form factor. It's highly viral, though, and I think the thing that is so transformative to me about this last round of technology innovation compared to the other ones I've been in, all the other ones there was a barrier to entry, or at least it was net neutral. The virality this time around, it just seems like the virality gets stronger and stronger. And so I think there's a social phenomenon here, but I think it's an economic phenomenon that tapping into it. I think John's idea of figuring out how can we tap into that contagious capability, it's a big deal. So those are the things I think. And as I said, it's not a deal it's not what Waterloo specializes in, it's not what MIT specializes in. So it's kind of like, I was talking with Andrew, this is sociology meets technology, and there's a design center and a liberal arts, remember, English major, the liberal arts opportunity here, which I think is huge.
Well, in design, we had a discussion about that. Is that we grew up in a time when the artists were on one end of campus and the engineers were on the other end of campus. But I think we've seen that the most successful devices bring designers in at the front end. When you say that you don't think the app culture is and if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, please correct me, that it might not be a sustainable culture. Do you think? Why do you think that?
I think the need to have a separate app for every form factor is going backwards. And I think there's two parts of apps. One is the technological aspect of having, in some cases, dumbed down, but in almost all cases, a lot of diversity. The second issue is the economic model, where you're either going to get something free and get annoyed by ads, or you're going to have to whip out your credit card and pay $3 or $5 or maybe eventually $20. That's never really worked in the software industry. In my way of thinking, people have liked to buy the platform. The reason Microsoft has a high market share is you basically pay one cost and you get a huge ecosystem of Microsoft stuff, and then you're done, and you're not going to have to hit the toll booth every time you go through. So I think both those issues, the economic model of apps and the fact that what people really want to get to is all the features they normally have on the web, and we have web standards to do that. We don't need to cover them up with some kind of shim. I think over time we're going to go back to where we are, which is which was a web that's just way better connected now because the connectivity continues to get better.
I mean, the problem for guys like me in the content business is the web doesn't have a business model. Apps might. If people are accustomed to being able to download ringtones, they might actually pay 99 cents to hear me blab on a little bit. Eugene, what do you think of that?
Well, I think, I'm not going to fully agree. I'm actually not going to agree with you on it. I see the world becoming apptastic, and I don't say that tongue in cheek.
Can somebody tweet that right now, please? Apptastic.
Appropriate. Just follow my appropriate to apply the correct thinking here. I grew up in an era when personal computers were being born and companies banned them. We've seen this before. This is highly disruptive. I think we'll agree on that. The question is, what are the consequences of that disruption? So let me illustrate. WeatherBug has saved my travel schedule this winter, and it's been a harsh winter, as you may have noted. Everything from 30 inches of snow in Boston to an ice storm in Austin, and very cold last week in California. WeatherBug, a consumer app, is helping me be a better traveler because I can get a pretty good idea what's in front of me or behind me. I arrived in Montreal Sunday morning, and I said to the conference organizers, there's a big storm on the way here. Now that was easy because I got on a plane in Toronto in a snowstorm. But WeatherBug, I could show it to them. I said, here, it's coming, right? I wasn't that smart. But so you look at something like what are the most useful things in the app world today. And I love it when Apple says, I got 365,000 apps, What are the useful things? And I think it's a question of usefulness. And there are some very useful things coming from this. There is an application that Niagara College put together, funded by MRI recently, is a weather app that helps farmers see how weather's affecting crop production. If you haven't noticed, there's a worldwide shortage of food emerging. So useful telemetry, useful access to information, and I think you described it well. There's a lot of content out there, and I'm going to get a plug in for OpenText. We help you manage that content because it's got to be managed. It will overwhelm you if you don't have good ways to look at it. And I think if we look at the different industries, I spent a day yesterday with people in the oil business, the gold business, the copper business, and their number one challenge is apps. Not finding the resources. It's apps for health and safety, wellhead safety, putting this manual through a manual in front of the person who's fixing something so he doesn't blow up an oil field, and that's topical for them. So there's a very interesting opportunity around apps. I think that we in Waterloo need to get our heads around in Waterloo, but also in Canada. They're here to stay. They are a consequence of smart surfaces and networking. So the question is, what's an app world going to look like? There'll be winners and losers here. And, I think to fight that trend fights the swarm. And hopefully everyone in this room has studied swarming techniques, yes. It's part of virology, but swarming is critical. Look what's going on the Twitter, the YouTube, the Facebook. And
Spoken like a true beekeeper.
as a true beekeeper, that's right. It's deep in my psyche. But, I'm doing an event on Saturday, and I sent a note to Margaret Atwood, a famous friend, but she said, okay, I'm going to tweet this to 135,000 people. Are you ready? And yes, I am. Now, I sent them to Issue. You all have tried Issue, I hope, issuu.com. It's an app. Now, it may not look like an app, but it damn well is an app. So that's the world we're in, and figure it out and make a lot of money at it and build a better world.
Is there anybody in the room today that wants to share a story of having to make the decision about whether to invest in a better enabled web, whether to invest in HTML5? Because the app world, of course, is 4, maybe in another few years, 7 different worlds, and it's a tough way to make a business because you can't just make it for one device, right? You got to make it for a bunch of different devices, and that can hold you down. Anybody having experience with that?
Right?
So, go ahead. So what's it?
That's why they invented the web.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody betting on the enhanced web? Anybody betting at all? What about, okay, let's turn to super apps then. We had a little bit of discussion about super apps, and that's something that RIM is talking a lot about. John, do you want to talk about how you see that rolling out?
Yeah, so this is where I see the real challenge, and let me use the consumer app side just for the moment. So I have never seen such a fury of new consumer apps that are coming out, and it's constant, it's relentless. People are tweaking different things, adding in location-based features, et cetera. So, but it's lots and lots of stuff. At the end of the day, the real question is, and let's just focus in on the mobile user for a moment. How many apps realistically is a mobile user going to be really using? I've seen some people quote, the maximum limit is just like your phone, 7 digits. So 7 apps is kind of the maximum amount of real estate you're going to have.
It's like how many TV channels do you actually watch?
Correct. So if that is the case, to me, the interesting aspect is going to be, and I already am seeing the problem with my own smartphone, in that there are a few things that I really only focus in on. The first thing that you actually turn on and look at. And I like the fact, and I'll use the BlackBerry for a moment, now that it's been combined with my LinkedIn and my Facebook, and I could actually start to see the information in one place in one inbox, that starts to be exciting for me. And I think that is where there's going to be a lot of carnage in the consumer apps, because you're going to have to fight for the real estate of being one of those top 7 or being one of those top 10. And everyone else, it's not a question of a good app or a bad app, but once Facebook is there, for example, what is really going to cause you not to go to your Facebook and go someplace else?
But if you're a Manulife, let's say, and you're getting a playbook, and that's an encrypted environment, is there opportunity there in creating apps for each of those companies?
So this is the analogy then. So when people on the enterprise side, when they turn on their computers, what is the first app that they tend to look at? Aside from OpenText, the first app might be Microsoft Outlook. And so the question is, if that's what your first app is, and then you have 27 other apps around that, is that part of the typical workflow of an employee? Will they actually go and use those apps? And the answer really is, people don't want that. So I think you're going to start to see the super apps really come onto the enterprise side, where you have a few platforms and the apps really build into that platform, and frankly work seamlessly, with the super app, so that you're not opening up 18 apps a day, because the reality is it's not going to happen.
You know, one of the things that I mean, there's so many solutions that I see in the back area there for problems, and you know, 300 companies at Communitech are trying to solve problems that people have in their businesses. But it seems that quite often we forget about the human impact, and that if the adoption of the digital age seems to be an issue. I know that, for instance, in the government of Canada, that has digitized so little of its archive. You know, the ability is there to do it. It's just sitting on a shelf for 2 years because nobody wants to wrap their head around it. So the futures that we're all talking about, we have to, and Geoffrey, maybe you want to jump in on this for a second. Are we spending enough time thinking about adoption, training, and helping people feel comfortable with all the innovation that is pouring out?
I think we got to watch out. We may have the wrong demographic on this stage right now, because most of what's happening here is happening with people that are at least one generation, in my case, 2 generations younger than myself. So I think it's part of the deal. The thing that I think part of the paradigm we have in our heads, and I certainly have in mind, is that there's a utility vehicle to IT that was the core of the idea, and somehow the surface was outboard of the utility. So if we remember how we built programs, we started with the database, and we built the transaction, we built the workflow, and then we did the user interface. Well, this is completely the other way around. And if you think about just the sheer impact of video, broadband video on this medium, it's become an emotional medium, not just an intellectual medium. And when that happens, the socialization and the Facebooks and whatever, as more and more video gets into this stuff, and it becomes a much more social and impactful thing. And so all the things that we used to do, you know, all the kind of rational and analysis and the training and the rollout and all that, it's like, man, I'm just not sure that's where the force is coming from anymore.
It's becoming more human.
It's becoming very much more, which means it's more ambiguous, it's more unpredictable. The thing I think is cool about apps is that there are 365,000 of them, an overwhelming proportion of which are useless and will never be used. But that's fabulous, because that's this massive, that means 365,000 different developers got somewhere published somehow.
Right.
With a bad country song, probably, right? But the point is when we were doing this the last time around, I was thinking about this. The last time we had the multi-platform, it was 1986. Do you put it on DOS? Do you put it on OS2? Do you put it on Windows? Do you put it on the Mac? Do you put it on Unix? We had at least 5 platforms, and it does rationalize. And to Phil's point, there is a part where you say, look, enough with that crap. I think HTML5 will be the next layer that rationalizes that out. But I think apps will run on HTML5 too.
Well, look, admittedly, we're all really old. But one of the things that age does for us is we remember that Apple has done this before. They come up with this really disruptive, really well designed device that takes the media by storm, and everyone gets excited about it, and it populates the world with some incredible ideas. And they create an ability for developers to add on to their system. They used to call it extensions, as I recall. And people start selling them. Now, we didn't have connectivity back then, but you could buy all these extensions, and then Apple would poach them all and actually, say, well, actually, that is a good idea. All that diversity you're creating is wonderful because it gives us some great ideas. And they would kind of adopt them into the system. Because at the end of the day, to John's point, you want a platform. You don't want to have to sequentially open up all these different things. You want one system that melds it all together. And I think what RIM's doing, for instance, in combining the personal side of your life and the enterprise side of your life is a fantastic idea, because guess what? People don't want to have 2 ways of, go to 2 different email boxes. We want to integrate these things. We want one system that puts it all together. So, I actually think the whole Apple thing will work out pretty much the way it did before.
So if it does that, I think that's a good insight. So if last time it was Microsoft, the Valley thinks this time it's going to be Google that will do exactly that. But do you think that Google is well positioned to do that?
No, I think, well, they might. I actually think it could be Microsoft again.
Okay.
Because they have proved through the years that they adopt in a very nice, elegant way, slowly but surely. They adopt things and they put them together in pretty good platforms, and you pay once. I don't pay for any of the Microsoft software I use at home because, MKS has a corporate license and that extends to personal use, so I don't pay for any of this stuff. And I can just take whatever they develop. And so they keep me in the box because it's a platform and I want everything to integrate. It's why, you know, their Nokia thing will probably work pretty well because now you can create a platform that extends into mobile. So I don't know.
Okay.
I'm a bit of a skeptic on Google because they do one thing so unbelievably well. They haven't shown they can do all these other things unbelievably well and make money at it.
Eugene, let's. You talked about the fog, and we're around the same area, which is that, you know, people are getting overwhelmed with information. They're getting overwhelmed, perhaps, with IT solutions. Adoption and human frailty may be getting in the way of many of these trends. What do you see?
Well, I think, you know, if we look at the notion of legacy systems, and I'm showing my age, but you know, every company has legacy stuff, lots of it. And the question is from where folks are today, you know, different governments being no exception. You know, we heard from the CTO of the federal government saying they got all this COBOL, lots of it. Stuff's, you know, 40 years old. Every company has that kind of stuff.
They got COBOL guys making a lot of money because they're keeping it running. Yeah.
And a lot of companies have that. So the question is from the current state to the future state, and I look to 2020 and beyond. I mean, you have to take a 10-year view on this. A couple of things are very clear in that fog to me. One, we're in a content decade where, you know, Landa was right. Everything that can be digital will be digital. There's no question. And you look at that and say, what does that mean for an enterprise? Well, the use of media, you know, one of the fastest growing products at OpenText is our media management product, OTMM. I'm not putting a plug in. We're over at the Waterloo Inn looking at how do we handle the load, because people want to put all their media objects in a logical fashion to teach, to share, to sell, to educate, all these things. To represent the company, and it's not a brochure. The web started with brochureware, and it's you know, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, what's a good video clip worth? Could be priceless in the right hands, and we're seeing some of that on YouTube, right? The question then is, where does the company go as people start to retire, and people are retiring at an accelerating rate? What do the young people, and you called it right, what do the young generation expect when they show up at work? And if we design the workplace 2.0, I think that's the opportunity. It'll have app elements, it'll have tethering, it'll have the human network, but workplace 2.0 has not been well defined by any company. And that's the opportunity. No different than 12 or 13 years ago, a failed Coca-Cola experiment became the BlackBerry, you know, and that's exactly what happened. So, you know, unexpected consequences, but Workplace 2.0 will be a very different place.
Do you build that, John, do you build that in the cloud? I mean, for all the companies that are out there trying to decide whether or not to put their architecture out there or to hold it closer, what's your best advice as you look forward?
I mean, I look towards a customer and what's a customer's buying pattern. I think at the end of the day, enterprises hate buying software. They want to buy a service. And a lot of the cloud opportunities really came about because of the frustrations of enterprises that just simply said, I want to pay, and I want to make it work, and I want to hire a whole group of IT folks in there. I don't want to worry about the updates. I want it to work, and I want someone else to do that. So I think it's really the response of the marketplace, and if that's the case, it's not saying that you know, I wouldn't confuse the SaaS revenue model with the traditional enterprise revenue model. It was really more of giving a choice to a customer with what they wanted, and frankly, it's growing because customers like it. At the end of the day, I don't think most customers are really calculating the total cost or economic cost of what they're actually buying, and most don't care. You know, the thing that I do find very, very fascinating, and I think OpenText is a good example of a company that's kind of built around this, is unstructured data that is being developed or being captured at an unprecedented rate.
Yeah, I think we collected more data last year than we have in the previous history of mankind. That's right.
So you kind of think about that, and one of the interesting kind of categories of companies that we're kind of seeing again, you know, whether you want to call it the BI space, analytics, every social app that we've been seeing that's tied to commerce, what is it really trying to do? It's trying to interpret the mounds of information, whether it's the location, using video, using the customer preferences to make a rapid decision on whether if this customer is walking down the aisle and I want to offer this price and have that phone be the buy button, how are you going to capture and interpret that information? And everyone's talking about it, but that is extremely difficult stuff to do, and it is fascinating on who's really going to win that. And that's really an enterprise app, but it's an enterprise solution, but it's really serving a lot of consumer-based applications. And I see that happening completely in the cloud.
I'm going to go to Geoffrey, but I want to give you notice. We need some questions from you guys, so think of one, and Geoffrey.
Well, just this thing about cloud. I think systems of record, the classic financial systems, don't want to live in the cloud. You may put them there because of the economics that John just described, but an IT CIO doesn't want to put those in the cloud. But conversely, systems of engagement, whether they're consumer, like what was just described, or whether they're the Facebook social kinds of things, they do want to be in the cloud because you want to communicate across many boundaries. And so I think this second generation engagement systems definitely, well, they're impossible without the cloud in the consumer space, and they're virtually impossible. You'd have to have like portals and stuff in the enterprise space, and you think, oh, yuck, that's so last century. So I think that's where cloud's going to make a big difference in the enterprise.
Yeah, and I think that particularly comes in where it's not just enterprise data that they're trying to access. There's third-party information. You know, if you have an ERP system, you need tax rates for all these jurisdictions. Well, you don't want to maintain those. When you're integrating third-party data, then it makes much more sense. And I agree that there's going to be a mix of where it's useful and where it's...
And the compute power in the cloud is unbelievable. So what Amazon, who would have believed that Amazon would be arguably the single most credible cloud provider right now? I mean, it's just Mr. Bezos doing another one of his amazing left turns. Yeah.
Okay, Ian, Angela, anybody got a question for the panel?
Or a comment.
Or a comment?
Yeah, there's a hand.
There's a hand. There's a brave hand over there.
See?
Hi, I'm Deb Krismanich, the CEO of Power Needle Inc., and I'm one of those apps. So how do I sell to you 50, 60-year-olds?
I'm sorry. Deb and I spoke, by the way. She's got a gamification app. She's putting games on top of enterprise and business processes. So how does she sell to those folks? Well, go ahead.
Well, because we're not the gaming generation, are we?
We're not. But
Speak for yourself. I grew up on games.
Oh, all right, okay.
So
That's clearly
I was
much
on an
older.
Apple II, I'll give you that.
yeah. So how could she sell
asteroids.
gamification to OpenText?
You know, as we get older, we forget what we learned in kindergarten, right? Play is useful. I flew back last night with the guy, the CTO for Spin Master. Interesting company. If you want to take a good look at an interesting company, they do toys and they do online games. And I think you're on the right point. How do you capture my imagination? And it takes imagination. The number one missing ingredient is imagination. We've got lots of Me Tooism. Who's going to argue that a pad technology is not cool today? The question is, what comes after that? So how do you capture people? I mean, there's only two things I've learned, and Apple uses them both. It's mind mapping from Wyckoff. She was on their board, and they took the lessons well. And a famous Canadian who, I just want to show of hands. Everybody know who Seth Godin is? Just show of hands. Okay, you've all read his book, Idea Virus. You hopefully, every one of your employees has read the book. That's that kind of thinking. So give me an idea, a great idea, and connect the idea to me, and that's what this cloud allows, and you'd be surprised.
By the way, he's a visionary. In that term, that first curve I showed you, visionary, right?
But, I
Which
mean,
is what you want.
There are organizations and large organizations that actually incubate that kind of imagination. I worked for Disney at one point, and Imagineering would arrive at Nightline, ABC News Nightline, and they'd walk in as design experts, and they'd just redesign the place and look at it with fresh eyes. And often that means welcoming into what is primarily a business engineering culture artists, and I'm always teasing the guys at Communitech, they need a skate park. How do you in your organizations bring in the artists so that you are able to have enough people that when somebody from the outside comes in and says, I have a gaming idea, there's enough people in the room that are going, awesome. Start with you, Phil.
Are you interested?
Well, on top of being old, I'm not a visionary. But I think that the problem is, I'm not sure I would, well, there's lots of people in an organization that are creative, if that's what you're talking about, that will, you know, the idea, I think there's a real problem in, already IT departments are scared of all the junk that comes in over the web that distracts and potentially puts their organization at risk, right? And downloading a ton of apps, some of those 300,000 ones that no one can examine or check, that's a deeply disturbing idea, I think, for many IT departments, and rightly so. So some, you know, and again, that's why people like platforms, because it's a bit more self-contained. So I think it's a challenge selling kind of consumerish stuff into enterprises, because you're always going to run into that problem of saying, well, I'm not sure I want my employees doing this all day. And what if it's dangerous, and what if it's, you know, what if it harms the company somehow?
So I have a question for Phil. So let's go the other way, because I think I'm thinking about what MKS does and embedded systems. What about the Internet of Things? What if we said, look, you know what, there are 5 billion people in the world, but there are 50 billion to 100 billion connected things that have not been connected yet but want to get connected. Do you see that as when do you see that? I mean, we've always talked about the Internet of Things, but to date it's been relatively a minor part of the total story. Where do you see
those
that
things
going?
will get connected by our customers, so they're the people that make all these devices, but they'll only get connected when they deal with the serious security and content issues that come along with that. So, you know, the reason we have a great business is that people who make those devices have a much larger risk, because they're in braking systems, they're in medical devices, they're in airplanes, where the idea of software having defects has much more serious concerns than it does in even a corporate IT environment. So sure, the idea of connecting all those devices has tremendous utility, and they definitely want to go there, but only when they can make sure it's totally under control. So getting a virus in your car braking system is a problem.
Or your nuclear power plant.
Right.
Which is no different. When I was 23, I almost lost my job because I brought a personal computer to work, and the IT department said that's an illegal device, because if you weren't on a mainframe back then, you couldn't have a personal computer. This is a true story. Nortel, the company I was with, had a policy against it. So did BCE. So, you know, the world hasn't changed, because the sacred society, that's right, the sacred society of control needs to move from control, and I think this whole next generation is going to be about well-managed versus mismanaged. And, you know, I get into discussions, we had a very active discussion in California about, so the IT guys are over here and the business guys are over here, and I said, stop it, guys. Either you're well-managed or you're not well-managed. To deny that information technologies, and there are multiple types, are not part of your business means you don't use email, right? They go, oh, well, I'll use email. Okay, they're embedded. So everything will become embedded over time. And you know, before I leave this earth, the things we're talking about today, whether it's apps, whether it's super apps, whether it's mega apps, whether it's work as play. What do you get when you get work as play? Productivity. Have a nice day. Wow. And you know, social media. What's that about? Collaboration, ideation. Think tanks. Now, where do we go? We go to. That's why we're driving. We're helping with Stratford and the hub, and we don't have the answers at Open Text, but I'm prepared, and Tom is, and John. We're prepared to put serious dollars on. Lady here runs our hub thing, and you know we're now tied into Monk, and we're going to grow these little incubators, for lack of a better word, and figure it out, and hopefully create lots of shareholder value and create a whole new world in Waterloo.
Another question. I'm just on the adoption issue. I was just had a friend of mine inform me that the Globe and Mail professional communicators just allowed their employees to access Facebook at work.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, is the area of corporate security and stuff like that. And how are they going to move to the cloud successfully, or are they going to disappear?
Oh, no, they can't. The security issues are only going to get worse, right? I mean, the vulnerability of contemporary society to malicious actions via the internet is increasing every year, and it's at a scary, scary place. I'm on the board of Akamai, so we see about 15 to 20% of the internet traffic worldwide all the time. And it's a very, very scary place. And so we haven't, when those things start rippling through, the demand for all the security, reliability, all those things that were on that one slide, they're going to be huge. And there's tough problems to solve because crooks are smart. These are very, very, and by the way, some of this is military. So I mean, this is the next battlefield too. So this is really, really, really high-tech bad guys. And we're taking it for granted right now. We're kind of in the sort of the peace, freedom, hippie, when long hairs guys were safe and it was good, We're going to get into the darker side of this cloud here in just a minute. And I think it'll be a huge, I don't know, man.
Well, but what's funny about that comment though is I get a lot of that as well. Yet, for how many years we hand our credit card information to anybody who asks for it with absolutely anything, and yet that's inherently risky, and we all know it is, and the amount of fraud on that is
the problem now is I can steal 40 million credit cards with one act.
No, absolutely. But my point is that there was an assumed risk of doing that, and there was all the various risk mitigation things that you could do to try to mitigate it, but not eliminate it. Right. I kind of think it's going to be the same thing. There's going to be, a group of companies. Military is a good one, where maybe they'll just never do it. But when I look at, will it be 80 or 90% of the industries? I actually think it will be. I think it will get good enough, frankly, until there is a major, major disaster, and maybe there'll be a reversion back.
Is this what's holding us back as a country? Because as a visiting American, I'll inform you that Canadians buy more life insurance than any other people on the planet. We're incredibly risk adverse.
We still die. Right?
Yeah, we still die.
Okay.
Yeah, but is that what's holding us back? Is fear? And is that when you all talk about the trends of the next 10 years, are you factoring in the fear factor in that?
Well, I think I think we need to look to Diffie Heilman. Does anybody know who Diffie Heilman were? Two individuals. Anybody know who they were? No. Use them all the time.
Yeah.
So Diffie was on retainer to a little company that was born in Ottawa, Nortel. He wrote the DES encryption algorithm that is very hard to crack, and you use it today. Cisco's got it right. It's going to be a mobile agent app, if you want to call it that protects you from the bad stuff, because there's a lot of bad stuff out there, because there always were crooks and always will be crooks. The thing is, though, do we have the right, in Canada, the right brain trust to move the yardsticks? Because there is fear. There's uncertainty. My mother-in-law, who's 72, all she worries about is identity theft because she sees it on U.S. television. And that's her preoccupation. And we are conservative as a culture. I think the trick is to, in a mobile world, how do you have a mobile life? Because that's really what it is. And the biggest problem with this device, and I'm hoping our friends at RIM solve it, is the encryption is pretty weak. And the RIM has built their whole raison d'etre on a secure way to do things.
It's also a little weak on Flash.
It drives me bananas. I'm ready to throw it away, for that reason. But the point is, though, so we as a society, if we look at what's going on at ICQ, where they're looking at photonic transmission capabilities, and I commend Mike for the work that he's doing there, and I've seen it up close. It's how do you do things without exposing yourself to harm, identity theft being an example. We've got an insurance company working with that said I could lose everything, all my information on all my 50 million subscribers in 20 minutes. The WikiLeaks is showing issues. So, the whole notion of a safe way to be on net is important. And I think we in Canada actually know more about this than most, yet we don't capitalize on it yet, and that's an opportunity.
And we've also turned out to be the hotbed of app development as well. So we're not.
I have to jump in
thought
here, of course, because
Yeah.
everyone in this room knows that if you want good security, use Certicom algorithms, not Diffie-Hellman. But, and that's now owned by RIM, so they have all the tools that they need. Look, the end users never care about security, which is why people who run IT departments and governments and larger information systems have to, because they will always be defeated by the carelessness of end users, and that again, probably will never change. But again, that's why you adopt standards, cryptography standards, security standards. And you know, people talk about the potential security problems of the iPad, and you know, they can be easily fixed. The question is, will they be fixed in a standardized way, which is far less likely. You know, it's why people need to adopt common standards for security and cryptography that can actually allow information to come together, because if we go and build non-standardized ways of doing this, then nothing ever communicates. But yeah, the infrastructure needs to worry about security because end users won't. Anyone here could turn on full-strength encryption and digital signatures through Outlook. No one ever does. It's all there. It's free. You could just turn it on, but no one cares.
All right, the human factor again. Thank you, panel, Geoffrey, Phil, John, and Eugene, very much. Appreciate it, and I hope this was useful to everybody in the room and that you had a bit of takeaway. The rolls are stale by now, after an hour, so lunch is on, but they're a little crustier than they were an hour ago. So thanks very much.
Thank you.